We have a talk from one of our CAB members in Defeat HIV, Laurie Sylla, who, to paraphrase, is giving a talk entitled, "You Want Me to What?" So thank you, Laurie.
Thank you. Am I using the one that says PC or Mac, or does it not matter? Okay, thank you. So this is more about cell and gene therapy in general than it is about reservoirs specifically. To start with, I have no disclosures to make. During our outreach work to the community, what we found was that we were running into some visceral responses when we talked about cell and gene therapy from people, and we thought it would really be worth exploring this more deeply. So we brought this idea to Hans Peter and to Keith, and they agreed with us, and we worked with our clinical core, and in our grant proposal, the CAB and the clinical core worked together to create the idea of doing some focus groups to explore the perspectives of end users around cell and gene therapy in particular as a means of potentially curing HIV. So what we did was we recruited people from one of the safety net clinics from the Madison Clinic here in Seattle that serves a lot of the low-income folks who have HIV. We did 4 focus groups in December of 2017 with a total of 19 participants. So this is a small sample that needs to be taken into consideration in terms of generalizability. We intentionally oversampled African American patients at the clinic, in part because they're typically underrepresented in research, and in part we also hypothesized that this group of people might be most distrustful of research based on a lot of history. And we also thought they also might be most distrustful of this technology. The whole sample was poor. Almost 80% lived on less than $1,000 a month, which isn't very surprising, but it's certainly difficult to do in Seattle. So, were the participants familiar with cell and gene therapy? And the answer is, in general, they were not. They mostly had not ever even heard of this, either as a technology or for curing HIV. So even though they hadn't heard of it, how did they feel about it, right? Because we often have opinions of things we don't always know a whole lot about. And that was pretty much their response. People found the idea very scary. They thought it was risky. The idea of, mucking with your genes was just taking things a bit too far. They had fears about potential side effects, the treatment not working, what it could possibly do to you, and all the unknowns that are associated. Can people in the back see what the quotes actually say? Okay, good, because I wasn't intending to read them, but wanted to make sure you could get their words. So a lot of people felt that, if it's not broke, don't fix it. Like, why do you want to mess with this stuff? They didn't understand the need for cell or gene therapy, particularly given how easy it is to treat HIV now. And someone even referred to AIDS being a disease of the past. They thought this might be more necessary for cancer than it would be for HIV. And people were really afraid to change what they felt was already working for them. They were comfortable with their treatment, taking a pill a day and being undetectable. There was also a fair amount of skepticism voiced about the possibility of an HIV cure through any means, including cell and gene therapy, saying things like, I've got it and there's no way I'm going to get rid of it. I haven't gotten rid of it until now. It ain't going anywhere. That's how I feel about it. So, the skepticism combined with their comfort and their satisfaction with their current treatment I think is instructive for us when we think about what is it going to take to recruit people in the future to participate in studies. So when we asked them about the whole idea about could they see themselves participating in cell and gene studies for HIV cure, people talked a lot about not wanting to be guinea pigs and not wanting to be test dummies. We run this funny balance in research where, people are angry if they're not included, right? Why are women excluded from trials? Why aren't there black people in trials? And then you want to include people in trials and people say, well, I don't want to be a guinea pig. So it's kind of a funny balance that we need to strike in order to be inclusive, but to have people feel like, not feel like they're guinea pigs. And so people expressed concerns about messing with stem cells or other genes and what that might do to them. And they were worried about unknown effects, and including saying things like, I don't want to look like a Sasquatch monster either. So, and people really did have questions, will I grow a sixth finger? Will my kidney fail? Well, will I change my sexuality? All kinds of things came up for folks. So overall, I think I got ahead of myself. People saw themselves as healthy and didn't want to risk their health and their 1 pill a day regimen that they knew was keeping them undetectable for something that was unproven, unknown, and that they perceived as risky and scary. They were actually pretty incredulous that we might ask them to stop taking their medications after having the importance of adherence drilled into them for so many years. And some people were born with HIV, so their whole lives, right? They've been told, don't miss your meds, don't miss your dose, don't miss your dose, you're not going to get another chance. And a lot of them came up when we had, less forgiving regimens than we have right now. So people were very concerned about the health risks of participation. What happens if something goes wrong? How are you going to fix it if something happens to me? You think you're going to do something that's better for me, but what if it goes the other way? So that was a huge concern for people. And people had different levels of vehemence about their lack of desire to participate in trials. One person said, you could offer me $1 million and tell me this is a cure, but you can keep that $1 million. I'm staying where I'm at. And, no way are they going to do that to me. Versus, well, let me see somebody else do it first. So people also expressed other reasons for possibly not participating, ranging from inconvenience to potential resistance, irreversibility of changing their genes, and believing that their doctors wouldn't support a decision to participate in a study. And, you can see they said things like, am I going to grow a third eye? And, what if you don't make it through the study? So, and people worried about how many visits will I have to make and what are you going to do to me when I actually show up? What we heard a lot of was they wanted to see it tried on somebody else first. Someone said, maybe I would do this if they if they gave that to Magic Johnson. Give it to him and let me see how he does, and then maybe I'll think about it. So really they wanted to see somebody else who had had a successful positive experience before they were willing to take on the risk themselves. Some participants thought that somebody would really need to be desperate to enroll in a study of this sort. And they thought that maybe if enough compensation was offered, somebody who was homeless might be willing to participate in order to get some stability in their lives. Or they thought individuals who had been unable to achieve viral suppression under the current medication that's available might be more more open to participating. There were a handful of participants who did say, well, they might be open to considering it depending on who did it and what kind of compensation there was. Someone said, he thought he would need to be paid $1 million to participate. But there were a number of factors that they would weigh, and a lot of people spoke to trusting their doctors and not wanting to try anything without their doctor's approval, which again points to a direction I think we should think about when we think about, as we move from basic science to people, how do we engage clinicians in this? Because a lot of people are going to look to their doctors for approval before they make a decision. So unless we do a good job of engaging the clinicians, we may have trouble with recruiting people to participate. So as I said, when some people got past their visceral response, they did talk about consulting medical providers and assessing side effects. Some did speak to the level of compensation, and a lot of them were broke. And so the idea of money was appealing to them as a way and being in studies in order to get compensated. So it's also going to be important to figure out how do we fairly balance, compensating people for the risks they're undertaking, for their time, for the procedures, for what we're asking them to do, and not also providing a level of undue inducement that would encourage people to take a risk that they might not otherwise be comfortable with. The other thing was we heard from a few people about altruism and the idea of paying the sacrifices of those who had gone before them forward. And so that was also a motivating factor. So what else did they have to say about HIV cure research? Oops. Well, okay, if I could get it to stay in the right spot. Several participants subscribed to conspiracy theories, and they believed there already was a cure and it was being withheld from them, either because they didn't have money or because pharma wants to keep making money off of people with HIV and profiting off of their lives. We also heard a fair amount of distrust expressed towards researchers in general, the government, and the medical establishment, although again, they did trust their own medical providers. So, references were made to Tuskegee and allowing black men to live with syphilis and stuff that happened in World War II and all of those things, and people believing that people with HIV are not valued and other folks just might like them out of the way, and why should we trust those people to put anything in our bodies and mess with our genes? So participants had a lot of questions. Some were about what is known about the efficacy of the interventions studied to date. They wanted to know if these therapies had been studied in rats or if they'd been studied in people yet, and whether or not an intervention would indeed be likely to cure them. Some questions were about exactly what would be injected into them, how often, for how long a duration, and what kind of effects it could have. Some wanted to know about possible side effects, including changes in physical appearance. They wanted to know if they'd be paralyzed, if they'd pass out, if they would develop hives. Some inquired about how sure we were that these wouldn't be heritable changes. They wanted to understand how the intervention worked and how it could control their viral load in the absence of other medication. They also wanted to know what would happen to them if something went wrong and they got sicker as a result of participation. That was probably one of their biggest concerns. So what suggestions did they have for educating people? Because clearly more education is needed. And the most repeated suggestion they made was to have someone who had already been through it come and talk with people and share their experience. In fact, the event we held last night that I hope many of you were at, Medical Angels, was created in direct response to what we learned as a need expressed by our local folks living with HIV, so that they could hear from people who had gone through cell and gene therapy procedures. And I do want to thank Matt Chappell and Matt Sharp for sharing their experiences last night. Additional suggestions they had were using billboards and advertising. So moving forward, building trust is going to be essential. I think that's the big hurdle we're going to need to leap over. And there are a number of steps that we can take to move in that direction and enhance community understanding of cell and gene therapy. We have more detailed recommendations than I think I have time to convey today, but briefly, given the complexity of cell and gene therapy research, we need to develop simple communication and educational materials that dispel misconceptions and that explain how the experimental interventions work, what their risks are, what their potential benefits are, what we do and don't know about them, the methods of administration. Using testimonials from previous participants in cell and gene therapy research will be an effective way to share information and will offer an additional pathway to build trust and to overcome skepticism. Educating and building relationships with HIV clinicians will be important, again, for building trust among people living with HIV. There are many ways that we can do some of this. We can create interactive web pages that have links to resources. We could have live chat hours on them, offer opportunity for people to leave comments or where community members could ask questions. We could have samples consent forms on the site and do some of that electronically. I think we need to engage in more social science research to understand end user preferences for educational materials, including how they should be tailored specifically to different groups, because not everybody is going to be receptive to receiving information and messages the same way, and they won't all have the same concerns. It might be valuable for cell and gene therapy researchers who are working on HIV Cure to partner with cell and gene therapy researchers in other fields who are working in other disease areas, and an interdisciplinary approach to cell and gene therapy might help to overcome some of the specific HIV-related conspiracies that may surface. So this is my community slide. What did we learn and why is it important? So we know that cell and gene therapy is unfamiliar to many people who are living with HIV, and it is perceived as very scary and risky. There was a lot of reluctance to consider trial participation, especially if it was going to mean an ATI. Trusted medical providers and early trial participants could be helpful for building trust and generating interest. And this is important because if we're ever going to move cell and gene therapy into the community as an actual treatment, we are going to need people who are going to be willing to participate in trials. So I'd like to acknowledge my collaborators from the CAB and from the Social Science Corps, and especially I would like to acknowledge our focus group participants. So thank you.
Thanks a lot, Laurie. Questions? Matt? Oh, Glenn, I was just going to ask you to comment.
Thanks, Laurie. That was great to see more of the full data from your focus group studies. And I just want to, I'm Matt Sharp. I was one of the speakers last night. I've been 9 years now since I was in the safety trial for the first Sangamo gene therapy trial. And I'm more than willing to speak about that, as you know, and write about it. But I wanted to just say there's other options for that as well that people might want to know about. There's strategic work with companies and with other institutions to develop a process around working with the community and doing stuff like you're doing so well here in Seattle. And finally, I just want to thank the Defeat HIV CAB for really creating a model for what this should look like and starting from the bottom and getting data from the community and then going out and implementing that. I mean, that's the way it should be done. Finally, I just say I would love to see you do this in a new cohort of different populations, just to see how it might be a little more positively viewed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other?
Well done, Laurie. It's on. Well done. The question, did you actually go, after all of after the end of your discussions, did you actually go back in? At the end of your discussions, did you actually go back in and ask participants, so here's how you thought about this. Here's how you thought about all of this initially. How do you feel about it now?
Well, there was a little bit of information I think that got provided during the group, as some of the questions came out. We have not then taken that group of people, provided them with a specific bunch of education, and say, hey, did you change your mind?
Yeah, exactly.
People were, we had advertisements at the clinic so that people could come last night. But, we haven't had the resource to be able, to really do that kind of work where you go back and you give feedback to people and you say, hey, this is what you said. What do you think? Did that change? That would require some additional resource to be able to do that kind of work.
Targeted education.
Yeah. So we haven't really done that.
Okay, maybe one quick question.
Oh, no, I just wanted to say, I think when it comes to these things and when we see patients talking about conspiracy theories, it's really easy for us to take that and use it to see the community as ignorant. And I just want to point out that at the same time, no, I think this is useful work and it's useful to know these things, but also we should consider that at the same time you could also be putting up a slide of things researchers have said to these people, a slide of things that medical professionals have said to people that are about equally ridiculous, I just want to say. Weird questions you get from doctors arguing, do you get the male or the female dose of the medicine right in front of someone, these types of things. And so I just, wanted to bring that up and make sure people keep that in mind.
Right. Well, and I think that the beliefs people hold, they don't come out of nowhere, right? There's a reason people have conspiracy theories, right? There's a reason people think that a cure might be being kept from them, or that they shouldn't trust the research establishment in general, given either what's been done to them or people like them in the not very recent, not very long ago past. So. We do have some bridges that we need to cross over if we're going to really build effective bridges with folks.
Okay, thank you very much again.
Thank
Laurie.
you.